As of late, I've been honing in on specific time capsules within the history of gaming, or touching upon game topics that have either been mostly forgotten or just aren't talked about enough. It could be something old or new, but still something that goes under the radar for reasons X, Y, and Z. Recently, I had covered Action Quake II, a total conversion mod for Quake II that was quite popular during the life cycle of that game. But with the release of the sequel Quake III, as well as the release of Counter-Strike, it would drop in numbers significantly to the point where not that many people played anymore besides the veterans that have been there from the beginning. It brought about some unique mechanics and a setting that was quite refreshing for its time, and Counter-Strike would end up realizing that similar formula to something that was slower paced and more tactical. Well, Quake III also had its fair share of conversion projects, giving us different settings and even different gameplay that departed from its source material. One of those games was Urban Terror, a team-based shooter that was similar to Counter-Strike, but also had elements of Quake. It was a game developed by Silicon Ice Development back in '99 as a total conversion mod, not long after Quake III's release. Some of the members within the project had previously worked on Action Quake II, and would go on to provide their input and experience into Urban Terror. This was a game that I had fond memories with. It was one of the many free games I had discovered in the late 2000s, as I was getting into PC gaming. I had gotten my first gaming rig back in late 2007, and was already playing some of my favourite games like Doom 3 and Fear, as well as Counter-Strike 1.6. But then I had the idea of seeing if I could find free games online that I could download and play, and one of those games was Urban Terror. The game at first glance had immediately struck me with the similarities it had with Counter-Strike, the range of modern military weapons, the similar pace of movement, and the recoil of the weapons that you fired as well. I remembered playing it a fair bit at the time, but I also remember not being very good at it. I didn't care though, because I was having a lot of fun, and that was something that mattered more to me at the time. But it was also a game that I never fully understood then, and eventually, like a lot of other people, including me, the game would eventually be forgotten, and I had moved on to other games afterwards. It's something that a lot of popular games from the 2000s fell victim to due to the passage of time, with some exceptions of course. But as the years went by, new trends and tech would push the industry forward, and in effect, the interests of the casual audience. Urban Terror was a game that represented an earlier stage of competitive FPS multiplayer in the PC world. And it was also a time too where not everyone gamed on a PC. It wasn't as prominent as it is today, which would explain why not many people remember this game other than the Quake veterans, as well as the ones who had been playing Urban Terror before it got released as a standalone back in 2007. So let's get into Urban Terror and talk a little bit about it, shall we? Now, originally, the development for Urban Terror had started as far back as '98, where the team had planned to make it as part of a mod pack. Back then, companies like id Software would release what they called mod packs, which was a compilation of user-made content for people to acquire and enjoy. But as development for the game progressed, they would then make it into a total conversion mod instead for Quake III, where they would take the realistic weapons, the setting, as well as the gameplay that was reminiscent of Action Quake II. In 2000, the creators of the game would form as Silicon Ice Development, made up of developers from other countries collaborating to make a unique project. With their experience with modifying Quake III's engine, development was relatively quick, and by 2000, they already had a working beta that they would showcase at QuakeCon 2000. It gained a lot of popularity after this, and the team would continue working on the game and ironing out issues that were raised or noticed. And over the years, the mod would continue to be perfected and updated with new textures, sounds, maps, models, and weapons. When Wolfenstein Enemy Territory was released, they would then work on a new Urban Terror game called Urban Terror MX, adding in new gameplay features as well as vehicles. But during this time, the company had changed their name to Frozen Sand, and for other reasons, the game would never even reach an alpha stage. But when the source code for the id Tech 3 engine was released, it would lead to a number of other forks for it being created, and also the game becoming a standalone project. Because of the engine becoming open sourced, this meant that Urban Terror could become a legalized standalone product. Frozen Sand had made it a standalone product in 2007, no longer needing Quake III as the base game, and it would use the IO Quake III engine to power the standalone version. The latest version as of today is 4.3.4. Eventually, work on a HD version of Urban Terror would be started, where Frozen Sand would try to buy the id Tech 3 engine off of id Software, but a contract was never finalized, and while the company was working on their own engine, the scale of their team just wasn't large enough to undertake the making of an in-house engine. It could have taken them a decade before it would even finish. They would try other engines like Ogre 3D, but it didn't quite match the vision that they had for the HD project. Over time, they would eventually stumble upon the Unreal development kit, and around the release of the Unreal 4 engine, they found the perfect engine to port the game over to. And as you can see, this version is pretty much night and day graphically speaking, while still having that classic look to it. But on the note of this particular project, also known as Urban Terror 5, it's been pretty much dormant for quite some time. Their Twitter feed hasn't really shown anything that suggests that the project is moving forward, and their official YouTube channel has a video from about a year ago or so. As for whether it's still happening now, who knows? As for the game that we still have, well, like I had already said, Urban Terror had similar elements of Action Quake 2 and Counter-Strike, as well as Quake 3, such as locational damage, recoil, realistic weapons and a modern setting, injuries and bleeding damage, and an emphasis on precision. You have virtually every weapon available to you, and the variety here is quite nice. You have different accessories as well that act as a utility on the field. And unlike Counter-Strike, you can change weapons at any time. You just need to respawn for the changes to carry over. In terms of speed and movement, it's slow and tactical, but it's also fast like Quake, but not quite as fast. 3 unique mechanics that Urban Terror would have would dramatically change the pace of the game if everyone else is doing it, such as sprint bunny hopping, crouch power sliding, and wall running. This gave Urban Terror a more unique edge over Counter-Strike at the time, because it allowed you to play at a faster pace if you chose to. This gave Urban Terror a more unique edge over Counter-Strike at the time because it allowed you to play at a faster pace if you wanted to. In a lot of competitive matches that were held, you would see a good number of players utilizing these techniques while still bouncing back and forth between being slow and methodical to fast and frantic. It was an ebb and flow that allowed Urban Terror to be the best of both worlds in this respect. As for how it holds up now, well, I think if you're used to Counter-Strike's gameplay, it won't take too long to get familiar with it. But on the other hand, the mechanics such as bunny hopping, power sliding, and wall running will be another thing to learn and get used to. Compared to Counter-Strike, it had way more game modes to enjoy, where if you went into the traditional bomb defusal or hostage rescue mode from CS, you'd then have team deathmatch, freeze tag, free for all, and even gun game that was quite fun. Not to mention the jump mode, which was sort of like Quake Defrag, where you would use the game's movement mechanics to traverse the map. The game catered to all different demographics, and it was also easier to get into compared to Quake because of the faster time to kill. Performance-wise, pretty much any PC can run it nowadays, and the game is completely free too. On an additional note, this was also one of the earlier Linux-compatible games in the 2000s, a time where Linux-based PCs didn't necessarily have the best time with a lot of games in terms of performance, but Urban Terror was an exception in this case, and as a result was quite popular among the Linux gaming community. But why isn't it popular now, and what had happened that would lead to its eventual decline? Well, the presence of entries like CS Source, CSGO, and the golden age period of COD starting from COD 4 certainly didn't help. Most people that had tried out Urban Terror quickly left it for more popular and casual games that had a bigger audience. Other than the game not being updated for quite some time, as well as the HD version of the game seemingly going nowhere, that's really just it. But there are people that you can still find on the servers, and teams from certain parts of Europe still hold up matches here and there. It's a game that's still being kept alive by its dedicated community, as well as some of the developers that still keep tabs on them. At the end of the day, Urban Terror is an underrated classic of the 2000s FPS multiplayer scene, where it was a great blend between Counter-Strike and Quake. It wasn't too realistic, but not too arcadey either. Not too fast, but not too slow. The game is still out there, dwindling as time passes on, but it was an important game within Quake's history as well as the history of FPS gaming too. Definitely check it out if you're looking for something similar to CS 1.6 or Quake 3. Thank you for watching.